We're New York State's Center of Excellence in Environmental and Energy Systems. We're pleased to offer our January Research and Technology Forum. We've got about a dozen people here in the room at SyracuseCoE, and we have 16 registered to listen in online. So I'd like to welcome the folks who are listening via the webinar, and I'll say a few words about SyracuseCoE, and then I'll introduce our moderator for today's program. One of the things that we aspire to do at SyracuseCoE is to bring together a diverse community of collaborators, and right from the start, we said that really it was in bringing together a diverse community that is where innovation happens, through intellectual collisions between people who have different backgrounds and different knowledge. So this R&T forum has a broad community of people in the room and also people on the web, including many people, I think, who may be interacting with us for the first time. So if this is your first interaction with SyracuseCoE, welcome. We were designated in 2002 under a program of New York State called Centers of Excellence, which is meant to promote the interactions between industry and universities to develop new products and to commercialize those products. We're New York State Center of Excellence in Environmental and Energy Systems. We have a broad program of interactions in indoor environmental quality and energy efficiency for buildings, and clean and renewable energy, and in water resources. We focus on innovations in technology, innovations in process, and today we're going to talk about innovations in business as applies to our programs. We call our monthly program Research and Technology Forum, but really this is about bringing things to practice, and we'll be led by individuals who we've interacted with over many years. So our moderator today is Linda Dickerson Hartsock, who currently is the executive director of the Blackstone LaunchPad at Syracuse University, and she's an adjunct faculty member in the Whitman School of Management at Syracuse University. Linda has had an extraordinary career. This is the latest chapter in economic development and innovation. She's held leadership positions in a number of organizations, including SyracuseCoE. She served us and Center State Corporation for Economic Opportunity jointly by wearing two hats simultaneously. She was the Vice President for Innovation and Technology at Center State CEO, where she also served as the Executive Director of the Clean Tech Center, which is funded by NYSERDA as a clean tech startup clean energy incubator. And she was the director of the Office of Industry Collaboration at SyracuseCoE, all simultaneously. Previously, she was a member of New York State's Economic Development Team. She served as the Central New York Regional Director for Empire State Development. She also was president and CEO of Cortland County Industrial Development Agency. Linda is a native of the Hudson Valley. She was on the faculty of Marist College, and she serves on a number of regional nonprofit boards. She's a past chair of the Central New York Community Foundation. And now it is my pleasure to turn the floor over to Linda Dickerson Hartsock, who will guide us in the program this afternoon. Linda.
So I am really happy to be collaborating with the COE again. And Ed, you've proved the point I make to my students that we're entering the gig economy. So the most important skill you can learn is how to continually invent and reinvent yourself as life moves you through interesting chapters, right? So if there's been a common thread that has tied my career together, it's been community revitalization and technology and innovation in ways in which we can harness those forces, bring them together to innovate and make change. And so, Karen's my colleague in Tripoli, and I think Karen and I are very much of the same mindset, which is you can invent a product, a service, a technology, but if you can do good and make a difference with that, you will have done so much more than just launch something else in the world. So it's a commitment, I think, that certainly the two of us and all of the COE community, but increasingly this generation of young people that we're teaching, like Kennedy, who you'll be hearing from shortly, are really committed to. We see a generation who are interested in making social change, unlike anything I've seen since I was in college in the 70s. It's been 40 years since I've seen this spirit of idealism and passion and commitment to civic good, and the willingness to engage and be involved in movements to create change. We I think, have been fortunate at the Blackstone LaunchPad to have the Blackstone Charitable Foundation say to us when they set up the LaunchPad here at Syracuse University, but also at 19 other universities around the world, to say, we want you to focus as much on social mission and civic enterprise as we do on traditional for-profit technology companies, the unicorns of the world, the billion-dollar companies that didn't exist 10 years ago. That we want to create places and spaces where we're training the next generation of global citizens who will be business and community leaders. And there's probably no better way where you see that intersection happen than the beginning of, and it's not that new because it started in 2006, this movement around certified B corporations, the new business of good, the new triple bottom line. And it's, I think, especially important for companies as they navigate change, invent and reinvent themselves, build their brand identity, distinguish themselves from the clutter in the marketplace, to be very upfront about what their, not just business model, but their mission and their values are. And at the same time, I think it's even more incredibly important for them to recognize that if they want to attract the best and the brightest, those future global citizens of the world, the Kennedy Patlins of the world, that they're going to have to very, very clearly stand for these principles, because the best and brightest, and Ed knows I've been saying this for how long, 15 years, right? The best and brightest can go anywhere and command any price in a global world. And if you're an employer and you want to build a workforce with that kind of talent, you want to speak to them in ways and with values that enable and empower them. And so that's why this is important. So we're going to spend a little time today. I'm going to do just a little overview on how the structure of the business that you elect to pursue or scale matters, because it conveys a message about you, a little bit about the forms of business incorporation. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because you have a handout. And also because we have a really good business attorney in the room who can answer any of these questions, David, better than I can. But as you go through this sort of decision-making process, it matters. And then the whole question of, how do I then take that mission of the business of good and apply it to a governance structure and operating style, and do it in a way that, with transparency and accountability, people can realize is not just lip service to this, that it's real, it's measurable, and it's validated, as it is in a certified B corporation model. It's validated by an independent third party. And so that customers, shareholders, investors know it's truly real. So that's what we're going to do. Then we're going to turn it over to Kevin, and you'll hear from Kevin, who has taken that journey of becoming a certified B Corp. He'll share with you what that journey was like, why he decided to do it, what it involved, and what the value proposition to him has been. And then we'll wrap it up with Kennedy. So let me start with just a couple of quick slides, and then we'll move on quickly with the program. So first of all, if you want to learn more about this, I highly recommend these two books. And for those who are on the webinar, one is called the B Corp Handbook, How to Use Business as a Force for Good. It's by Ryan Honeyman. who is actually one of the co-founders of B Lab, and B Lab is the third-party entity that certifies companies as B corporations. It is excellent. We gave it to Kennedy as a reading assignment last week. The other one that's very good is, frankly, the book that we stole the title of this forum from. It's called The Business of Good, Social Entrepreneurs and the New Bottom Line by Jason Haber. If you're with the Syracuse University community, we have an incredible innovation and entrepreneurship library just outside the doors of the Blackstone LaunchPad. You can check both of these books out, or you can find them at your own library. So good reading, and they'll give you a lot more in-depth information as you think about these kinds of things. So one of the things that I tell my students in entrepreneurship classes when they're going through this exciting and exhilarating process of ideation is it's not just about your business, and I know Karen has the same conversation because Karen and I sit together a couple of hours a week, right? It's not just your business that you're creating, that you're ideating, that you're thinking about. It's really deeper than that. It starts with your real mission. So you're coming up with an idea that solves a pain or a problem in the market, or realizes an opportunity, or is catalyzed by your passion. But what you do and how you choose to do it is as much about not just the business model and the way you're going to make money, but what your core values are, because that creates everything there is about your company, from the workplace and the environment, and the people who are going to choose to work with you, to, again, people who are going to invest in you, your customers. It is really important. And for a new wave of businesses, and certainly, as I said, for this younger millennial and Gen Z workforce, the idea of saying it matters to me that I'm accountable, I'm transparent, that I'm giving back, I'm redefining what success means, I'm doing good and doing well, I'm using my business as a force for good. Social, environmental, economic parity and justice matters to me, and I'm going to build that into my business model. And as you do that, David will tell you, because the next step we take as students are taking this journey, or new ventures in the community, is to say, as you move from idea to launch, you need to get to that point where you become something real. You're more than an idea, you're an entity. And so as you're putting together your early team of advisors, an accountant, an attorney, an insurance agent, the other professional service providers, and you're working as a team, you're starting by asking yourself those questions. What do I want to be? What's my mission? What are my core values? What's the right business structure to reflect that? And David can nod his head yes or no. Typically the conversation involves, can I just do this as a DBA? Should I be a sole proprietorship? Should I be a general partnership? Should I be an S Corp? Should I be Uber and chase investors and be a C Corp? Can I do this as a simple LLC? Do I need to form a limited partnership? Am I a limited liability partnership? And the reason you do all this is to create some liability protection for yourself, so that you're more than an individual, you're a company, you're building some sustainability. And those are the kinds of questions we usually, the kind of conversations we typically have when we're taking this journey, right? So David, I would say most people sort of start as DBA sole proprietorships, move into LLCs as they grow and scale. If they're a traditional mainstream business, will elect to move into an S structure. They're looking to take on investors, issue shares, create an equity structure. You'll merge into a C Corp. But the conversation we really don't have often enough at the beginning with people who are starting or scaling ventures is, what do you want to do? Not just what do you want to be, but what do you want to do? And how can you, as a business entity, be a force for good? As part of your strategy, as part of your brand identity, but as part of your really core mission and core values. So we don't have conversations around, well, could you do that as a nonprofit versus a for-profit? We think about nonprofits as entities that can't make money, when in fact they can and they do. And very often they have an educational or social component to them. It's a form of business structure that we should think about. And then, what is the difference between a for-profit and a public benefit corporation? Public benefit corporation is very different than a certified B corporation. So one of your handouts actually sort of looks at what those differences are. The most important thing to know is a public benefit corporation is a for-profit entity. It's not a nonprofit. A B Corp is an independent certification by a third party that, again, attests to and affirms the core principles and values that you're trying to espouse in your business. And B corporations actually came first. So the real quick history is the concept of the B corporation. And I don't know if you're getting into this or not, Kevin. Are you getting into this at all? I don't want to step on your toes here. So this idea started on the 4th of July in the year 2006, which the founders of B Labs call Interdependence Day. And over that summer, they worked on what does it mean to be a B Corp? What kind of assessment would we put a company through? And by June of the following year, the first company went through that process and was certified. That led to a number of really important things in the world of venture development. The first is impact investing. And I don't know how many of you know the term impact investing. So they are investors. They could be angel investors. They could be actual funds, early stage funds, who are investing in companies because they also believe in that triple bottom line. So they're not looking for a traditional 7x or a 10x rate of return for these unicorns who are going to have hockey stick growth projections, but they're looking to invest in companies that are going to move the needle in their community, in the industry they're in, who are going to make change, who are going to drive new industries like clean energy, or again, make an impact either in their backyard or somewhere around the world. And so the first impact investing started to happen in 2007. And around that time, Inc. magazine started looking at this and saying, there's something really interesting going on here. Companies are beginning to become really interested and engaged in this. What does this mean? And Inc. magazine did their first story on one of the early B Corps. That led to the creation of public benefit corporations, which happened in 2010. And so that's a state designation. Right now it's available in 31 states and Washington, D.C. The very first state to sign on to this and say, we as a state will certify you as a public benefit corporation. Again, you're a for-profit corporation answering to your shareholders, but recognizing your stakeholders are your employees, your community, the greater good. Maryland became the first state to actually offer state public benefit corporation certification. So they they're different things, right? So a public benefit corporation is a legal entity. A B Corp, just like the U.S. Green Building Council LEED certification, is an independent certification. They both say to the world, I'm accountable, I'm transparent. I'm going to actually say what it is I'm looking to achieve in a measurable way in terms of impact, social impact, and I'm going to report that. The difference is through a B Corp, you have a third party measuring that accountability and that performance. And if you're a public benefit corporation, you're self-reporting. There's a cost to this, which says that companies that are taking that extra step to become B Corps are not only choosing to make this mission clear, but they're also choosing to invest in doing it, right? So the cost of going through the certification, you can see the difference based on just simple state filing, really can range anywhere from $500,000 to $50,000 based on revenue. And then there's an annual recertification process that you go through as well. So it is truly an investment to do this. But for the companies who do it, and you're going to hear more from Kevin because I'm wrapping up right now, there is a real value proposition to doing this. So again, as a company, you're making that big shift from a shareholder, strictly return on investment model to a stakeholder model. We're in this together. We're here to accomplish something that produces public benefit and common good. And that by voluntarily doing this, not only are we going to distinguish ourselves in this cluttered marketplace, but we're going to offer a better vision to our peers and other businesses around the world about a better way to do business. And you see this happening to a certain extent, again, as you look at it, started with Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, but now you see Mark Zuckerberg and even many, many younger entrepreneurs saying voluntarily, this is important to us. We want to give back in some way. We want to make a difference. How are we going to do this? And encouraging their peers to do that as well. Again, the most important reason is that it sends that message through third-party review and reporting on performance and compliance that you're serious. This is real. This isn't an article you write for your annual report, right? It's not a message from the CEO in the company magazine. This is real, it's measurable, and it's made a difference. And it says that you're looking to you actually see the value of social good as a competitive advantage. And at the end, that competitive advantage, that social good you're creating, creates values for everyone. So I think it's wonderful. I think the challenge is for companies like Kevin's to get out there and educate others about why it's important, and again, what the value proposition is in terms of going through this process. And Ed, as I'm looking at the papers, I thought for a minute you took the bios, but I found them good. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce someone else who's been a very long time colleague of the SyracuseCoE. He's really been involved. How many years, Kevin, have you been involved with the CoE? I almost want to say going back to the start, right? Yeah, that you've been a trailblazer in so many ways, both in establishing this program, but also in terms of your own business. And I'm sure that many of you know Kevin through his business, Northeast Green Building Consulting and Northeast Natural Homes, where he works as a builder and a building scientist and ecoliteracy educator. He teaches and designs in nature's image. In his work, involves a framework that harmonizes building science with biomimicry and resilience to create place-based standards and solutions that enhance the living world. And he's also been a pioneer as one of the very few in central New York who've gone through this process, and again, can attest to the value and speak to why other companies should consider it. So with that, please welcome Kevin Stack.
Okay, so thanks for the kind introduction. I appreciate it. I borrowed from the tragedy of the commons to bring up why I believe I first decided to become a B Corp. There's many reasons behind it. I'll start with saying the doing well by being good, I think, lives within each of us. I believe it's an innate sense that's somewhere deep inside us, and for some reason when we become corporations and serve on board of directors, somehow that part of our core values seems to get lost. I'm not entirely sure if it's the moral compass that gets astray, it's hitting a magnetic field and we get off course, but for some reason we feel more bound to promote and report our financial success and pretty much hide our social and ecological doings, whether it's a good impact or a bad impact. So my company went through a lot of transitions in the past 35 or 37 years. I can't remember, but every one of the corporate structures that Linda mentioned, I've been through. I started as a C Corp, I went to an S Corp, I went to an LLC, and now I'm a B Corporation. I would say I'm most proud of being a B Corporation, and I think it's important that I describe to you why I got started and how I got started on this path. So I had the opportunity to watch my business metamorphose And as I look to nature, I see how a larvae can transfer into a caterpillar and come out with something very beautiful. But I was watching my business, not necessarily getting past that caterpillar stage. And I was looking for some way to actually release that in a form that came out beautiful and functioning very well as a composition of fitting in with all of nature's creatures. So my first thought was, well, as I watched my company go from billing to metamorphize into inspection and verification services, working on large projects, I became very in-depth, and my son did as well, as how to prove performance of physical things, not so much the living environment. So that became increasingly important to me. So when I started serving on boards of directors, and some of them were pretty big boards, I would actually go in the 2-day meetings, and the people I met and we had discussions with most often were the CFL and the financial people, because we would spend 2 days talking about the finances. And so one day I raised my hand, and I'm just a little guy in the room. I represented the residential portion of this board, and I asked for an accounting of the ecological and social equity. And in the silence that occurred, all I could hear were the click, click, click of the CFO and the financial accountings looking for that chart of account that they could pull up on that PowerPoint to show what we were doing from a social and ecological equity point of view. There wasn't a key that they could hit that could pull up a P&L that related our impact on the environment and the social part. So having a very excellent CEO in place, he looked directly back at me and he says, well, go do it for us. So Josh and I created something we called the SEER report, that acronym meaning something deeper, but it was called the Social and Ecological Equity Report. And we reported that back to the board, and it was well received. We still haven't seen the entire impact of it, but everyone started to look within themselves. And I believe for the first time, we started to find that doing well by being good again as a board member. And we started looking beyond the shareholders to the stakeholders, and that became increasingly important to us, that we started looking past the shareholder and started to involve the stakeholders. So for Josh and I, it became a process of really turning the lens around on ourselves and on our business to see how we actually functioned. And were we doing what we were saying? Were we doing well by being good? Well, I don't think you know unless you go through an impact assessment like this. I would say that the B Corp assessment was a very rigorous process. It took months. It didn't take weeks. It was literally months. It was a lot of reporting back and forth. There's a lot of information that you had to put forward. It was almost as if going through a lead certification process where every product and everything that was introduced and measured and the performance behind it had to be vetted by a third party. And you just couldn't say it. You had to do it, and you had to prove that you were doing it. So when I say months, this was going back to our accountant, having our bookkeeper involved. I believe the first phone conversation we had with the B Lab assessment team lasted about 6 to 8 hours. And then we followed up 2 weeks later for another 6 to 8 hours. And there's a lot of formalities that a small corporation like mine didn't necessarily have into place. So we actually lost a lot of points. We lost a lot of credit points because we didn't have formal documentation of certain things that we were doing with our employees from the social side. So turning that lens around actually was very helpful for me and for my son. So we made sure that actually what we were doing was important enough for us to consider our employees in a different way. So we scored highest in the environmental side, and that was no surprise. I mean, I believe we got 45 points higher than anyone else, and I'll show you in a minute here how that happened. But we actually started looking harder at the social side. We knew the ecological side was good, the financial side was okay, we were doing well, but what were we doing good? And you don't know until you start to look within yourself and actually the decisions that we start to make. So when we actually start to go, you can see from this B impact report. This is from 2016. We were certified in 2015 and 2016. Probably the bigger part of this is that, our scores were high. And Josh and I demanded that the impact assessment team listen to us. They didn't necessarily know what to do with us, and they certainly didn't know what to do with my son Josh, for sure, because he would ask hard questions in return. So they would challenge us and we would challenge them. We would say that you don't know how to measure us because we're a small family-owned business. We're not a Patagonia or someone else. We don't measure our energy uses in terms of ASHRAE 90.1. We measure it differently, used in different models. When we use the Lead for Home process to manage and measure our success in the projects that we do, there are different things embedded in there that's totally different than the portfolio of lead homes, the suite homes on the commercial side. And they didn't understand that. So it was a lot of instructional purpose back and forth between both of us. In the end, we were all friends. They came out and thanked us. They thanked us for improving their system for people like us. And they actually thanked us again for educating them on the environmental side and certain things that they didn't realize were actually going on in the world today. They just didn't know and didn't have it embedded in their DNA. So I believe we helped them, but certainly they helped us a lot more. So our score in the environment went to 59. The median score was 7. On the workforce, it was 23. The median score was 18. Customers, there was a NA there because they didn't know how to treat our customers in their impact assessment tool. From the community, it was 52 and 17. And I can say we scored high in the community based on some of the work we did with the Syracuse Center of Excellence. They took extreme note and actually wrote us a letter back based on our efforts to initiate a deconstruction effort in the city of Syracuse. And we did that in partnership with the COE. So that was one of the things they came back with. I think it was paragraph number 1 was based on our efforts to help launch and initiate a deconstruction effort. There was many other things they called out about us, but that to me was very important. The stuff that we were doing in the community actually gets recognized on an impact assessment from a societal standpoint, right? Governance, that was something that was a little bit difficult to get through. Josh handled that one for me, thank goodness. And then there were many other things after that came into play. So, so this is where I was 20 years ago, and I'm still there on what is on the left side of this screen. We work with all these entities, and I can say every day it changes. And it's very difficult. I can say 10 years ago when I walked into a Whole Foods market with my daughter, Jill, I felt like I was in a safe place. I thought everything there was good for me. I didn't question the price. I didn't even have to look at the nutritional labels. I knew I was in a good place and they were doing well and they were looking out for my health and welfare. Come back to Syracuse, New York, go to one of the larger grocery chains, and I don't even know what I'm looking for half the time. I don't even know how to assess it. I can walk up to the fresh fruits aisle and I can say, well, here's a package of raspberries from Mexico for $2.99, and here's one right next to it that says organic. It doesn't say certified organic, but it's for $8.99. And I know my 7 grandkids will eat those raspberries in about 3 seconds. So is it worth the extra cost? I just don't feel safe and comfortable when I come back home looking at this stuff. But as the product certifications like Forest Stewardship Council, Energy Star is a brand that everyone knows and trusts, but they probably don't understand today that it's actually being downgraded, that some of the rules and regulations are actually being pulled back and stripped away because of certain things happen at EPA. So I'm actually questioning the value of this, but where we're transitioning into is really from the last 20 years to the next 20 years, where it's good products and the good people, good companies, good corporations. And this is getting extremely important for all of us to consider, that we find our moral compass in these board meetings. We find our moral compass when we start talking about what companies are doing well by doing good and what companies are just saying that, right? So it becomes increasingly important, I believe, to differentiate yourself, sorry. And I believe that from my perspective, everything that Linda said is 100% true. Do I expect to get a benefit out of this and recognition? I don't think so. I think the biggest benefit for my company, and it's a small company at the time, I think we only had 10 employees, but the big benefit was turning the lens back on ourselves and proving that our core values were actually being interpolated and made available to everyone throughout our company and everyone we work for. Did it help us establish better goals? For sure, without a doubt. It put light in corners that I didn't know existed before, and it made me pay attention now. And every decision as a B corporation, every decision from here on out, it's almost like the indigenous people's motto about the 7th generation ethic, is that every decision you make now is based on your impact assessment and looking out for the stakeholders, not the shareholders. So being financially well is good, being social and ecological well is better. And how can we someday get into a boardroom or any of these companies and stand up and hold the social and ecological side in the same parity as the financial side? How do we get to that place in our world where we actually say something like that and prove our performance? That's where I believe we have to go. The legal roadmap, it was actually quite easy for us to incorporate this into our organization as an LLC. You know, there was a purpose clause we had to put in, create a material positive impact on society and the environment. So that's the easy part, just write it, place it in there. But it's always in our organizational structure. The director's clause, I really simplified it here, so these are my words, right? The director's clause, there's probably about 15 or 16 different entities you have to put in there. But I believe the directors are actually dialing down to what corporations are supposed to be held to. So the duty of loyalty and the duty of care was always the fiduciary duty. And I believe what we're dialing into when we get to a B corporation is that the duty of loyalty and duty of care on our boards and within, that rest within our companies are now to care for all life, not just the financial aspects. And I believe this is probably the most important part of it all. So when you're done, you pass, you get a letter, and then you have to sign your declaration of interdependence. And, you know, it's actually a pretty proud moment. I didn't think it would mean anything to me, to be honest with you. But to do this was to put a stamp on a company that you look very closely at, even though it's your own. It's tough sometimes to turn around and look behind you to see what you've actually accomplished over 30 years. And it became pretty important to me to do that. So for the past 2 years, and this is pretty, I believe maybe the most important thing to me, we got proclaimed as best in the world overall for 2 years in a row. That means we scored in a very high place of every other B corporation in the world right now. And that wasn't such an easy thing to do, but I can tell you, with the B Impact Assessment team, you know, this is new to them. So if you go out and you decide to change your corporate structure, don't be afraid to challenge what they're asking you and say you're doing it, but you might be doing it a different way. You may not be checking it, but you will from that day forward. And then I would say the other critical piece here is that when we got our evaluation part, which usually everyone gets downgraded, we went up. We were one of very few companies who, through their evaluation process, actually went up. And they thought that was quite remarkable for our company to do that. So that's paying attention to what they're asking you and actually doing it. Yes?
Do you mind my asking a question about the ranking you had up on a previous slide? It showed where you were, and then it showed a mean. And is that mean score all other B corporations, or are they regular corporations?
All B corporations.
B corporations?
Yeah, yeah. So you see, we work, my company's called Northeast Natural Home, so the environment's very important to us. So we are measured on such things as my son Josh has an office in this building. So they asked for, we actually lost some points because Syracuse University didn't want to divulge some knowledge, but because it was an elite platinum building, we scored good points. My home office, I'm in a home that's net zero energy. It's Energy Star certified and qualified. I have, photovoltaic systems up. We recycle our water. We have rainwater catchment things. All these are questions that they ask. But they ask it for every single project that you do as well. So out of the 2 years prior to that, they'll go back 2 to 5 years. In our case, they went 2 years, and they want to know every project that you worked on and how much water they saved on the basis of you being a consultant and or a lead verifier or a rater or a National Green Building Standard verifier. How much energy did they use? So, and their waste reduction. So the questions are, and you just can't answer them. You got to prove it. So bills of ladling, everything you do, every charitable donation. We were not tracking our charitable donations, only ones that we would give to, and they would send something back. But golly, if you gave something to an employee as a cash bonus or something like that, you're not allowed to count any of that stuff. You've got to prove it. You just can't say it. And it was intensive. The re-evaluation was extremely intensive. It was another 6 to 8 hours, and it was back and forth. Well, Linda, I think that's all I have.
Excellent. Nicely done. Well, same questions for you. Great. Either Kevin or I wanted to go into the nitty-gritty of what it is to be certified, but you have a handout. B Corporation Overview and Performance Requirements at a Glance. This was actually great to put together because now my students this semester are going to get a lecture on B Corp. So common questions, where to find resources, what the assessment looks like. The very last page is how to find a B Corp. If you're a young person and you want to work with a B Corp, how you find job opportunities at B Corps. Educational resources for folks who are teaching. There's a B blog that you can follow. So this is a really handy dandy in 4 pages, just about everything you want to know from A to Z about B Corps. So our last speaker gives me, she knows, great. So usually we say it's my pleasure. In this case, it is truly my joy to introduce Kennedy Patlin, who she really embodies the best of a Syracuse University student. The short bio I'm going to read doesn't even begin to touch at who she is or what she's accomplished as she looks forward to graduating this May. So she's a triple major in advertising, civic engagement through the Maxwell School, and women and gender studies. This past semester, she worked with us to create our first ever Blackstone engagement scholar role. And she defined that in a way that I'm quite confident nobody will ever be able to follow, because she really took it and not only did this incredible outreach across campus to find young people who were idealistic and committed as her, but she helped us create our first ever Impact Prize competition on the Syracuse University campus for student startups who wanted to be what it is we've been talking about today. And we really had no idea what we'd get when we launched this, but she did this meticulous job organizing it. And we ended up with 21 student startups, as I recall, it was 21, competing for this prestigious first prize, which now will become institutionalized, we'll do every year. She worked with students competing for the Holt Prize, which is, as is Karen, is considered the Nobel Prize of student startups. So it's for students who on a global scale want to make change. It's $1 million prize. The competition is each September at the United Nations, the finals. So Kennedy has been working to identify students to not only compete for that, but to mentor them and prep them as they go through the process of, as two teams will soon, heading off to Boston and Toronto for the super regionals and the chance to spend the summer at an accelerator at Holt Castle in the United Kingdom. She, more than anybody I've met as a student, has really brought together that intersection of business and civic engagement, really been focused on how we create better solutions, better societies, better places, better people. She's been a remembrance scholar at Syracuse University, which is about one of the highest honors you can get. She is truly an extraordinary human being, and I am going to miss her so much when she leaves in May, but I know she is going on to do great things, and we're all going to be so proud of you. So please welcome Kennedy.
Hello, let me see if I can. First, I want to say thank you for that. I'm so very flattered to even be here and bring this perspective. I was, kind of trying to think about what perspective it was that I was bringing to this space. And so I just kind of wanted to tell you a little bit about me and what this presentation is going to be about. So as Linda said, I'm a senior in advertising civic engagement, which again is through the Maxwell School. It's a relatively new program. I'm only the third graduating class, and women's and gender studies. So for me, my entire trajectory of school has been about kind of trying to identify those intersections. And, as I got older and as I started learning more and getting more involved with organizations on campus, I began to realize that there actually is so much potential in this space that is really just now starting to be unleashed. And I'm especially an ad major, so I'm always thinking about things from a communications perspective. So that's what I wanted to bring to this space specifically, because I'm definitely not a legal expert, I'm not a professor, but I do know about communications, and I'm obviously part of this millennial bracket that people seem to be so fascinated with. So I wanted to start by bringing out a quote that was actually in the Honeyman book that Linda mentioned earlier. And it really talks about the evolution of capitalism, which is a concept that I think a lot of students are thinking about right now, but don't necessarily know how to coin that term or what that even looks like. And B corporations are really an opportunity to really figure out how capitalism evolves, right? And how this sort of marketplace that is incredibly controversial and, is kind of notorious for not necessarily always being beneficial to people. How do we change the way that people are thinking about this sort of economic system, especially in one that might not go away for a long time? And so that was something that, again, through school, I've kind of thought about a lot. And I think essentially what B corporations do is it's really about creating businesses and products and brands that really work to evolve capitalism. But what I'm interested in is how do you market that and how do you communicate that sort of creation of opportunity to further maximize that potential and that opportunity, not only for you, but for your consumers. And so, again, as I mentioned, I'm in 3 different colleges on campus. So one is a communication school, one is a public policy school, and the other is kind of known as an arts and sciences. And so I originally started off as a public relations major, but kind of felt like my education at Newhouse was kind of missing that socially embedded, that socially minded piece. And that's when I went on to identify Maxwell and arts and sciences. And so I think the reason I brought this up is because traditionally I feel like on university campuses, it's seen as a very segregated way of learning where you don't necessarily create an interrelationship between public and social sector learning and private sector. They're often seen as 2 divided things that don't necessarily work together, or they can't be seen as working together. But now, again, through my education and being in 3 different colleges, I've started to see the opportunities of what happens when you do think about the public and social sector as 2 entities that can be brought together. And I'm seeing more and more, and not only this isn't just a me thing, a lot of my classmates are also incredibly interested in these processes. So there's so many students that are looking for, so let's say students in technical colleges like business schools, communication schools, they're actively seeking opportunities in the public space, in the social space, and they're really trying to figure out how can I integrate the skills that I have, these very technical skill sets, into these more socially minded areas. And so that isn't definitely something that's specific to Syracuse University. There's a lot of schools on the West Coast specifically that are kind of looking to integrate this sort of thinking. And I think a lot of it is, a product of what's happening in the workforce and the work environment. So we do have, of course, we see a lot of CSR and corporate social responsibility, and we're also seeing a push from the workforce to really get their employees to engage more so with their communities and go beyond just the everyday corporate setting. And so I think universities, are kind of starting to see that their students want more than just a singular educational experience. They want more of an interdisciplinary lens, and they want one that combines the, very technical private sector practices with public and social thinking, and civically minded thinking. And again, like I said, there's rising concepts like design thinking that's headed by IDEO, and a lot of different ways of thinking about problems and looking at things with new perspectives that I think is incredibly interesting and really valuable for anyone to look into and learn more about. This quote is from Pew, and I thought it was particularly relevant. It says that 89% of millennials believe that small businesses have a positive effect on the way that things are going, but only 38% of them believe that large corporations do. So there's a lot of brand sentiment and a lot of sentiments and beliefs around what more large corporations do and what they look like. And millennials kind of tend to think that small businesses are doing more for the local community as well as the national community. And so ultimately what I boil that down to is three things. So millennials are essentially looking for authentic, transparent, and responsible brands. So these are three things that are really important to them. And I will talk a little bit more about how that's enacted versus how millennials say they care about these things, but they don't necessarily always buy into them, which is definitely another challenge for a lot of companies, right? So it's one thing to be able to say that you do these things, but it's another to actually get a millennial consumer to go through on that consumer decision journey and actually make the purchase. But essentially millennials just want, and I think a lot of this is, due to the sort of landscape and environment that we're growing in the cultural, political, and social space, and one that's increasingly globalized. It's one where news is much easier to come across, and people have so many more platforms to talk about things without worrying about being censored or worrying about who's going to see it and who's going to disapprove of it. And so essentially, kind of linking back to my previous point, brand trust is huge for this demographic, and essentially B corporations are a perfect fit for a generation like mine simply because they walk the walk and they talk the talk. So not only are they saying they're doing it, they're actually doing it. And so I kind of wanted to mention this, and this is essentially kind of my visual way of explaining what sorts of companies are doing this well and which ones aren't. So of course, can anyone maybe tell me why they think I might have put any of these three on this screen? Do you want to maybe elaborate?
Sure. Dove has significant campaigns for increased self-esteem for different body types. Patagonia is great about their products conservation efforts, recycling, using recycled content in their products. Ben & Jerry's also kind of a local Vermont startup company, ecologically minded. And H&M, I know, even though it's really like fast fashion, they do have a big textile recycling.
So those are all great points, but there's also a flip side, right? So yes.
I just want to ask, that green line, I may have missed this. Is there an above the line and a below the line,
so
or
it's a horizontal line, so maybe I can give a clue.
So being over on the right is like better than being on the left.
So can anyone tell me why being on the left is not a good thing? So I have another question. How do you guys get your news? Anything.
On a device in my pocket.
Okay. Any other ones? Okay. So for millennials, Twitter is a huge source of news. And so the reason why I put the brands on the left is because they've gotten incredibly bad publicity. So I can expand a little bit on a few of these. But the point here is that millennials, how do I even go and explain this simply? Let me give an example. So H&M, to your point, is environmentally conscious, but I want to say maybe 3 weeks ago, they released a shirt with a black model who was a child, and the shirt said something like the best monkey in the jungle. So Twitter saw that, took a hold of it, and said, how did this get through so many people, and how did no one see how offensive that is to so many communities? And so that is why H&M is on the far left, Whereas we have Ben & Jerry's, who's on the far right. Ben & Jerry's is a brand who has specifically stated what they stand for, and they've advocated for those. So particularly the Black Lives Matters movement, they've been very transparent about where they stand on that issue. Patagonia is also an environmental brand, but they've also made direct correlations as to why they're an environmentally friendly brand, and they've also advocated for more green parks, national parks, things of that nature. So essentially what I'm doing here is kind of trying to show that, you know, you can do something, but if you're not backing it up with some conscious thinking and with communications that show that you're actually thinking fully and thoroughly about what you're doing, millennials aren't going to want you. And, you know, with so many different social media channels, we have the ability to call you out. And what I've seen over and over is that millennials are not afraid to do that. So just to clarify, not all of these are B corporations. Patagonia, Oligarchy, and Ben & Jerry's all are. Noonday is a fair trade organization. I don't know about their B Corp status. Another thing to note here is that all the brands on the left are traditionally regarded as multinational, larger international brands. So kind of going back to that Pew statistic that I put up earlier. So essentially the takeaway I have two from that graph is the first, which is that you need to stand for something. So really kind of presenting what your mission is and what your brand is, and really standing with that in all different aspects, from you know, creating it to actually communicating it. And also that quote came from the book as well. And then the second thing I wanted to mention is considering perspectives that aren't yours, which is all of, essentially, I believe that's kind of the root of communications, advertising, and branding, right? Because it's one thing to say, this is my product, but it's another to think about how your product fits into the lives of people that you want to reach. And especially the lives of people you want to reach who don't look like you or act like you or are in the same generation, right? So understanding and really critically thinking about those differences and how you might be able to communicate your brand and what you do in a way that is appealing and respectful of other people's perspectives and lives. And so this is the one thing that I think is really intriguing, is that, like I said, brands like the talk, but they themselves don't necessarily always make the walk. So in anything like this, I really do feel that this is kind of a cultural and social change that's happening through B corporations and organizations such as that. But what's happening is that a lot of consumers know about these things, but they don't necessarily act on it. And in other ways, you know, it's kind of like thinking about, for example, the oligarchy shoes that I have on my feet right now. I found out about that company, which is a B corporation, through Instagram. So it's there's a really interesting way that people are actually finding out about these companies, and they're very non-traditional, incredibly unique. But the other thing is, why don't I see any of my other classmates wearing these shoes, right? So there's this sort of word of mouth and more social dialogue that isn't necessarily happening. And so that's what I'm really interested in, is how do we get the consumers to be aware and act, and then get their friends to, both from a consumer standpoint, but also from a business standpoint. So as B corporations, how do these organizations and corporations create that awareness in order to actually drive that action? So it's kind of a twofold process where both parties are essentially responsible for making this social change, but it's definitely a challenge for both parties. And I think it's something that's incredibly interesting to kind of see where we go. And then I just kind of wanted to bring it home, basically, so kind of localize it back here to Syracuse. So as Linda mentioned, we worked on the Impact Prize, and over the course of maybe 6 weeks, we had more than 21, but 21 actually ended up being the finalist pool. So it was just a very fast process of students, and just like from all over campus, which kind of goes back to my earlier point that these students are coming from everywhere. They're not just Whitman students, they're not just Newhouse students, these are engineers, these are students from Maxwell. So it's really becoming this interdisciplinary field where a lot of people from non-traditional private and I guess educations are realizing that they too can also be a part of that. And then of course we heard earlier about local organizations in Syracuse such as NGBC. So just really kind of thinking about the ways that Syracuse in itself can create a community of impact. So thank you. I hope this was helpful. Thank you.
Open the floor for questions. I'm going to ask Kennedy and Kevin to come up front so you can ask questions. We have the ability to take questions via our webinar participants, so good. So, Ed.
So I want to thank you to all three of you for your presentations. So Kennedy, I want to start with the evolution of capitalism, and I'm going to leverage Kevin's comment about metamorphosis. So is capitalism the caterpillar, and is evolution the right word? Right. So is this an evolutionary change of capitalism, or is it a like transformation to something new?
Thanks for your.
I feel like in ways I can see how it's both, right? I would say it's an evolution solely because I think the transformation clause that everyone's doing, right? And I think that when we're looking at the majority of corporations, organizations, businesses, and communities that are out there, corporations, they're small part of that large ecosystem. So I think transformation is what happens when all of these parties really think about what they're doing and how transparent they actually are about the products that they're creating and how they're selling to consumers. Whereas I think B corporations is an entity that's figuring out how to evolve capitalism, which that's just like a whole other topic. But yeah, that's how I guess I would.
About Kevin, you take that. So from your perspective as a B Corp,
You need to form that question again for me, please.
so it's is this an evolution of capitalism, or is it a metamorphosis to something new? Is it a transformation?
I believe it's a transformation. We'll go down that path, not another one. And I could potentially use from a B Corp standpoint the word revolution rather than evolution. I like all things in nature and the mass space.
I will just say this, today at the LaunchPad, we probably had 10 students walk in without appointments just to say, use business plan, competition time. I've got an idea. 8 out of 10 in social enterprises. 2 are making the next mobile app that, will be on the app store with a shelf life shorter than Pokemon Go. It's my joke of the week. Right? 8 out of 10 came in because they had an idea that really was a social enterprise. Right? And from Canyon too wanted to create a school system there. We had 2 students who were interested in food recovery and food waste. I mean, it was just students looking at how he uses art to catalyze community change. And it's to say on any given day, 8 out of 10 are walking in with social intent. Kind of looks revolutionary, doesn't it?
This is probably more of a question for Kevin. And first of all, I do compliment the program. It was really interesting. I wasn't sure what I was doing here other than to attend, and found it really fascinating. Great subject. I didn't know what a B corporation was before sitting here. So my question is, Kevin, you were an LLC at one point, and you've transitioned into a B corporation from an LLC.
Still an LLC.
You're still in. So I guess that maybe that answers the question is, at the risk of sounding totally mercenary, what are the tax implications? How does the IRS view the B corporation versus its treatment of income, say, as an LLC?
There's virtually no change.
Okay.
It's just a certification by a third party. Right?
Oh, okay. Okay, so it's not a corporate.
So think of it as consumer reports of a good housekeeping seal of approval, or more appropriately, the U.S. Green Building Council designation that you're a platinum or a gold building, right? It's a third party certification, but it doesn't change. Feel free to jump in here and rescue us. It doesn't at all change your legal status. So from a tax point of view, any other point of view, you're still whatever business entity you are, an LLC, an S Corp, C Corp.
At least for now, there seems like there's a lot of changes going on in Texas.
The only legal entity that's different is that public benefit corp, which is a designation by those 31 states, and I don't
Including New York.
Including New York, and I don't even know if there are any tax implications that go with a B Corp, benefit corporation, I don't think there are.
No. But that does raise the question, if, as we call it a B Corp, we get confused that it means a corporate status, but instead it's really a seal of approval that you've met certain standards. How come I haven't seen local companies promoting that in their ads, on their website, someplace? I'm completely unaware of the seal. I've seen the U.S. Green Building Council seal, but I haven't seen the other one.
No, there's one right there. Probably not that many in this area.
Yeah, I mean, here's a plaque. It's the first time I've ever noticed it.
Oh, really? So Tammy actually did a hunt. She was putting this program together. Tell us what you found.
So we have several partner companies that are B corporations, but to your point, I don't know the extent to which they advertise. There's, of course, Northeast Natural Homes, which went first, and then Tatum Engineering down in Ithaca, and Good People Energy in Cooperstown. But I had a similar question, you know, if your role, having gone first, is as an educator to let others know about the importance and the value of that, how do you communicate it, and to what extent do they support it so that more people are aware of it and either find value as a customer or decide their own business if they want to take a look?
Yeah, so just to reiterate, I feel the value was more for my company than it was for my customer. Right now, I'm just turning the lens around and shining it on myself and my staff, and Josh and everyone else had made us realize where we were at that point in time and where we want to be, so it gave us good direction. Scoring high in B Corp was something that I wanted to promote from a business point of view. That's certainly a marketing 101, and we use this, what I have up here. I put it on my, my signature line, or it should be on my email list. But other than that, we really don't find much value in this area as of yet.
You haven't gotten any phone calls to say, are you a B Corp?
There may be one or two people that searched us out as a B Corp, and but I had a few LinkedIn requests from other B Corps, but for other reasons. And one of the things that I don't use is what they refer to as the Beehive, where it links all the B Corps together globally. So it's like a forum or a blog that you can join, but being an old guy like I am, I leave that for Josh.
So, you bought a pair of shoes from the B Corp. Did you know that it was a B Corp when you bought those shoes?
Like I said, it was a really that's for a lot of people, it was a non-traditional way of finding it. So, social listening and social media is always crazy. Like the things that you can do in terms of marketing and targeting consumers is unbelievable. So essentially what happened was I was following brands like Media Collection and really kind of trying to be a more conscious consumer in terms of those supporting leadership organizations. So that's kind of one piece of the puzzle is that as a consumer, I want to be a more conscious consumer. So you have to do that first. But then because as a result of the brands that I had been following and supporting, I essentially got sponsored posts from brands like Overtime, and then that's when I found out more about their shoes, and I was like, oh, I like these shoes, they're cute. And then, I went to the website, found out more, and then essentially decided that's what I wanted to put my financial support. So I think to your point, there's the B2B, but there's also B2C, which is business to consumer, and I'd be curious to see how many consumers actually know what B Corp is, specifically within the millennial population.
So personally, we look for B Corps to align with. So just so you know, this is a organic cotton shirt from a B Corp. So I've got something too. I can't remember the name of the company, but I'd probably pay more.
As much an observation as anything else relating to the Green Building Council. We had Norm Swanson do Hotel Skylar, and it became the first platinum certified hotel repurposed in the world. And it got next to no attention here in Syracuse. But it was being reported in Asian newspapers, it was being reported in Architectural Digest all over the world. Very unique. Now it's become so standard to say LEED Platinum certified that people are actually saying that we meet the standards, but they aren't taking the time to pay for to get the certification. They're trying to incorporate the standards into it, and I suspect what we'll see with this as an evolution is that sooner or later people will understand this really is an achievable standard. It's one that's worth achieving if you got the time. Otherwise, you should still at least aspire to it. And I would hope that here in Syracuse, where I find for anybody who doesn't know me, I spent 15 years away from this area and I came back intentionally. I believe that we do well by being here. Many of us have chosen to be here because of the nature of the environment, because we live in harmony much more. And maybe it goes back to the Native Americans or whatever else you want to think. But, Kevin could clearly be someplace else where he's building 6,000 square foot homes and getting the big price tag. So I compliment people who choose to stay here. I compliment people who can try to achieve these things. And I'll also compliment those who just say they're trying to achieve these things.
So you know what we need for Chuck is to walk around with stickers that say be positive, we need stickers that say be good.
Very good. So I just want to pick up on this. First I want to talk about the Hotel Skyler. So this is an example of the profit in their hometowns, not respected. And it may also be a reflection on our local media, in that we've done things in this building that are known around the world. And when we've tried to get them covered locally, it just doesn't get traction. And it's really strange. But to this point about buildings that get LEED certification, and then buildings that are said to be designed and constructed to LEED, but didn't get the certification. To me, as a faculty member, this is like the difference between taking a class for credit and auditing, right? If you said, I sat in the class, but I didn't take the tests, where's the documentation of the learning? So now I want to ask a question about public benefit corporations and B Corps. Would you say that it's the same, that a public benefit corporation is a B Corp that's not certified?
So that's a really interesting question. So I get fascinated with the whole idea of public benefit corporations because it's a pretty low threshold, right? It's inexpensive to do the filing. There is some reporting, but it's not at the level of, say, a nonprofit would have to report to the various entities within the state that they would have to report to. It is truly self-reporting, right? So there's no independent governance body that's looking at you. So I think, yeah, so I think public benefit corporations are an additional step that companies go through that have, at the end of the day, a low threshold, either in terms of effort or financial commitment, but it's a marketing, it's a branding strategy that says, yeah, we care about. So you see these companies who say, okay, so we're going to give 5% of our profits back to, therefore I'm a public benefit corporation. What are you reporting at the end of the day? If you made $1 million, you gave 5% back to whatever charity you said you would, right? Well, you might, as a corporation, be engaged in philanthropy anyway. There are tax advantages to making those kinds of contributions, not always out of public benefit, but quite honestly out of self-interest from a tax point of view. So it's interesting, and I don't think I haven't seen a whole lot of scholarly research yet, maybe I haven't just dug enough yet, about public benefit corporations. How do they deliver on that promise?
So New York State does state that 6 years ago when they implemented this B Corp status, that you could file and create your entity under that you had to be certified independently. You had to submit to independent certification. It doesn't mention B Labs. It just says a third party. And what the initial assessment that I'm finding, because I create 60 companies a year. No one's ever asked me to create a B Corp.
Yeah.
Not in 5 years. So I don't know how many we have.
Public benefit corp or
the filing under New York State law.
Right.
No one has ever come in and said, I want to be a B corporation under New York State law. So I don't know what the impact is. And they didn't at the time they wrote this as to what happens if you fail to do all this stuff. If you fail to meet the standards, if you lose your certificate.
Right. Or is there even a process to look at it? So, the charities registration bureau can look at you if you're a nonprofit and say, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? But who at the Department of State is looking at public benefit corporations to say, look at your promises of happening? Well, I don't know. I think that's a really interesting one.
Kevin, I can tell you you've been in business for 40 years now. Because in 1978, he left me hanging on a roof 3 stories above the ground.
I'll sue you.
And the only statement he said to me as I'm screaming, he says, "Don't let that roof, the bundle of shingles, fall to the ground because I can't afford to replace those."
That would be like a startup.
I may not become an attorney without that experience.
What other questions do you have for us? And you can get a little bit more about public benefit corporations in this handout. Let me see if I found anything else in here about. Certainly, if you file as a public benefit corporation, it's just a state designation. You're not doing anything with the IRS. Public benefit corporations pay taxes like general corporations, other for-profit entities. When you file, you have to list your charitable objectives. Reporting. So you have to file with the Attorney General, the State Controller, but it's sort of basic stuff. Your real obligation as a public benefit corporation is to complete reports to your shareholders, which outline the corporation's progress towards its public benefit purpose. And public benefit corporations are not obliged to share those reports publicly.
So how about this question, Kevin, as a certified company now, a B Corp certification, do you think you've had an impact upon your operations, either deleterious or beneficial, like to the bottom line? Because that's really where we're at for most corporations, trying to understand whether this type of certification, putting it at the tagline on your email, is some positive, but do you end up incurring $30,000 of extra expenses as you try to monitor your ongoing compliance?
Yeah, I would say that I'm not seeing the financial side of that, so the boost in dollars and cents, no, but the societal side, how we put things in place for our employees, yeah, see the benefit clearly of that, which enriches my company, right?
Back to Linda's comment that you can attract the quality of employee because you hold that standard up there.
Yeah, so if you want to do an analogy, I'm that organic raspberry tray that costs more than the inorganic one. It's a builder, right? So my other projects are usually more expensive. We pay it better than the whole show, and the benefit I get out of it, perform better than they're getting well where they could. It comes back to me.
One last wrap-up question, then we will adjourn to go up with reception. Thank you. SyracuseCoE for that.
Kennedy, what are you doing after May?
Question marks everywhere. So everything's kind of to be determined. I'm originally from Texas, so I'm kind of like looking to see if I might be able to get closer to home. But there's like obviously a lot of different industries and lots of different hiring cycles. So for me, a lot of it doesn't unfortunately start until April or May. So I'm kind of just playing the waiting game right now and just doing the research.
But what about a startup?
So we talked about Venture for America, we talked about startups, we've talked about nonprofits and NGOs, we've talked, we've had a lot of conversations about it. This I can say, whoever guesses is going to be lucky.
I will say the startup perspective though, especially when you're a little bit too, I think startup doing themselves are very interesting because you have to think about who has the privilege to be an entrepreneur, who can afford to be post-grad, student loans, right, and like potential sellers when you come home, who has the privilege to be able to enter that space and feel a little more financially confident, right? So that's something I think about a lot in terms of what is it we need to have access to that space.
So here's the secret plan. She goes to work for a marketing agency in a metro area in Texas, where she learns the skill and the trade. And in 3 to 5 years, she launches a marketing and branding organizations for B Corps, where she helps them tell their message to the world.
Great.
Actually, we're going to talk about that. Anyway, good. Well, thank you all for coming today. And thank